Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And yeah, my video for tonight's STAMPtember collaboration, it is with Concord and 9th. I went clean and simple. Still went non-traditional, but I went clean and simple. Not only because I have zero time right now, but also it's just where it went. You know, so non-traditional colors, I still managed to get some splatter in there. And yeah, for those that aren't aware, the collaboration sets between different brands and Simon Says Stamp is only during the month of STAMPtember, aka September. And they are limited edition, one and done. So when they sell out, they're not restocked. However, I will have a link in the description box below to Concord and 9th's line. They have just tons of amazing stamps and dies and whatnot, and just loads of inspiration. So I'll have all the links like I always do, and yeah, just keep watching and I will show you guys how I made these cards. So this is the Festive Flower collab set, and it's a great big 6x8 set. And what I really loved about it was this does not have to be Christmas themed at all. This floral can be kind of whatever you want it to be, really. And they've got some non-holiday sentiments. Like there's a hello, a thank you so much, oh, happy day. And I wanted to do this also in red because I was like, oh, it just, you know, classic red poinsettia. But like I said, I got no time. I'm scrambling. And I had blue on the brain. I was like, you know, I want to do these in blue. But if I'd had the time, I would have done sets in different colors. Because like a set of blues, do them in pinks, purples, reds, yellows. Do all the colors. Why not? They'd be fabulous, you know? So what I did was I took just A2 panels of Simon Says Stamp's smooth white cardstock, and I lined them up in my MISTI here, and I'm stamping the big solid image of the big flower. And before I even stamped with it, because it was a brand new stamp, I rubbed my fingers on it really well. That just helps it take ink better. And I'm stamping with Concord and 9th inks, and these inks do smooth out as they dry. I'm also not worried about everything being perfect because there's layers that are getting added on top of this, and I was pretty sure I was going to do some splatter. And I stamped 4 panels with that flower, and then I did 4 more panels, but I moved them to like the upper left corner of my MISTI, so I'm only stamping this kind of on the lower corner because these panels are going to go on the inside of the card, so I don't want this huge floral kind of taking up a lot of space. Like I've mentioned in all my videos, whatever I put on the inside of the cards, it's kind of with the intention of writing over it. But if it's something that's very large, intense like this, I don't want it taking up the whole inside of the card, because especially with this like midnight color, it's a little more difficult to write over. So the second layer of this image with the detail, I used midnight ink. So just a nice deep blue ink. And I'm also not super concerned about getting these lined up perfectly. You know, I was using the grid lines on my little Waffle Flower grip mat that I keep in my MISTI. I was using that as like my guide for everything. But at the same time, I was not concerned about getting it lined up just exactly so. Because again, it doesn't really matter. You know, with some types of layering stamps, you really do need to get them lined up fairly accurately just for it to look right, or, you know, if you're die cutting, etc. With this, for the most part, it kind of doesn't matter, but also it is very easy to line up. There's just obvious little tells, like how for the most part, really the way the centers line up. They line up perfectly, or the way the petals are, etc., etc. And there's only, for the main flower, there's just these 2 layers. There's the solid layer, the detail layer, and then there's 2 stamps for the centers. And they just line up. So I did all of the florals, and then I did the solid, like, first layer of the centers, and that I used Buttercup ink. So just a nice yellow. And same thing. Stamped it. Didn't worry if I lined up every single one. You can line up your cardstock like right in the corner of the MISTI, you know, to make sure things are more exact. But since I, knew that I'd be stamping like off the edges of the cardstock, that's why I chose to place it, in the center and just went with it. So I did all the solid centers, and then I ended up deciding with the more detailed one. That one I actually did struggle a bit trying to line it up, and I was like, who's going to tell? Honestly. So I just stuck it on an acrylic block and just stamped it. Didn't even worry about lining it up. It's fine. And for that I used Stardust, so kind of a goldy sort of shade of ink. And then I decided I was going to mask off the large floral on the card fronts. And to do that, I found this the other day, or whenever. It's been sitting for a while on my desk. This is my Eclipse masking paper roll. Some of you might remember this from way back in the day. My roll is literally over 15 years old. I've had it forever. This was one of my first kind of major purchases when I, was crafting, because I remember this roll being, it wasn't expensive, but at the time for me, it was a little pricey. And yeah, we all wanted it because, you get this huge roll to do masking with, because, this was back before we had like wafer dyes or like any of the good stuff we got now. So anywho, I will link this actually, and it came back on the market. It's Simon Says Stamp actually sells it. I was surprised. So there's this, or there's also like Simon Says Stamp has masking paper sheets, and Gina K has as well. I'll post links to those. Copy paper even would work, although it's a little bit thicker than this. And then the bonus to this is it's got a bit of adhesive on the back, and Post-it notes work too. Any of those things. So I just stamped the floral, and I just used Simon's Fog ink. I didn't want to use a really juicy ink to stamp such a solid image on, because that'll like saturate through the masking paper and kind of defeats the purpose. So I made 2 masks, and I just kind of cut inside the lines. I didn't make it perfect. Wasn't worried about it. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but I just wanted to kind of mask off like the bulk of the florals so that I could stamp the greenery. And for all of this, I'm just using acrylic blocks. So you could use your MISTI, and, especially if you're doing a ton, like if this was going to be like your Christmas card this year and you're doing 200 of them or whatever, then yeah, you do it in stages and it just works. But I'm comfortable using my acrylic blocks, and this just made it easier for me to like jump around and do all the different things at once. So for the greenery, I was stamping with lemongrass and avocado, and I stamped the little like pine branches with that, as well as the little, I think it's like the mistletoe type image. But again, it can be whatever you want it to be. And did all that, and since I had 2 masks, I could do 2 card fronts at a time, and then went and did the other 2 card fronts with the 2 layers for each of the different types of greenery. And then for the ones that are going to go on the inside, I just used that one little like sprig and stamp that with the lemongrass, and then the detail with the avocado. No masking needed, none of that. So I did all of that. And then the little berries image that goes with this, that layers with it, I almost did in reds because it would look cute with like just that little pop of red. But instead I used grays because I could, really. Sometimes there's not a whole lot to the thought process. I was like, why not? Something different. So I used Dove and Mushroom inks. Dove, the lighter one for the berries. And then there's just this little detail layer that you can add. And I used the Mushroom ink for that. And same thing, I just used my acrylic blocks. It was pretty simple to line this up. And there's a guide on the back of the packaging as well that just shows like this plus this equals this, And I always like that. I sound like a broken record, but I like when the companies like explain that. And it's layered on the set as well, like A1, A2, etc., etc. Always. It just helps, So for my sentiments, I used the MISTI for that. I stamped the Merry Christmas sentiment on all the card fronts. And then on all the pieces for the inside, there's a little stamp that says love and joy. So I just kind of lined that up and stamped those with VersaFine Claire Nocturne ink. And then after I had all of the card front stamped, made sure that the sentiment stamp was clean, because mine actually wasn't. I thought it was, and I'm glad I checked before I laid it out here to use as a mask. It still had some ink on it, so I would have smeared that on my card front, which just would have been rather frustrating. But I'm just using the stamp as a mask because I want to add splatter, but I don't want the splatter to go on top of the sentiment. So hence me saying, make sure your stamp is clean. And then I just laid it on top of the sentiment. And then for my splatter, I'm actually using turquoise Perfect Pearl powder from Ranger. But you could also use just regular Perfect Pearl powder. But and that's what I was going to use. And then I was like, wait a minute. I have like all the colors. I probably have a color that'll work. And I did. I had turquoise and it was perfect. So I just put a bit of that onto my palette, added a bit of water, used the stamp to kind of mask off where the sentiment was, had it in my splat box, and then used my fan brush to splatter a bit of this turquoise Perfect Pearl powder onto all of these card fronts. And Perfect Pearl powder has a binder in it, so the minute you add water to it, it's good to go. You don't need to use any sealant or anything like that. So splattered this onto all of these card fronts, let that dry, and then I trimmed all of these down. They were originally A2 sized, and then I trimmed them down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And you could totally mat these as well if you wanted to add like an extra bit of oomph to these. You know, mat them with black cardstock, or Concord 9th Stardust cardstock would look really nice. Like a little thin mat of that would just, you know, if you want to step it up a bit. But I decided not to. I used Midnight cardstock as my card bases. And these are top folding A2 cards. So I scored them at 5.5. So they're 5.5 by 4 1/4. And after I'd scored them all, the card fronts, I'm going to adhere with some Studio Caudia foam tape. So just a little bit like standard thickness foam tape. Usually I use my Simon Says Stamp Big Mama foam tape. But because these are much more clean and simple, I went with regular thickness foam tape. So it's popped up just a little bit more. So got that on the back of the card fronts, adhered those to the card bases. And that's why I trimmed those card fronts down a bit more. So the card base, that dark, you know, navy cardstock just frames it all nicely. Same with the panel for the inside. Got that adhered, and that finished off these cards. So they've got, you know, just a little bit of shimmer. Got my splatter. Still very clean and simple. Non-traditional with the colors, which I love, but oh, these would look really, really nice in red with a red card base. Oh, love. So many ideas. But anyway, those are my cards for tonight. Like I mentioned earlier, I will have links to all the things in the description box below the video, as well as links to my socials, my blog, etc., etc. So you can check that out in the description box below if you're interested. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you very soon in the next one. Bye.